Since the attacks last Saturday, there have been mounting concerns about the war expanding beyond Israel and Hamas. There are multiple powers in this volatile region, both nation-states and various militant groups. Hezbollah, the Lebanese terror and political movement like Hamas, wants to see the total destruction of the state of Israel and is supported by Iran. And that relationship is the focus of much of the concern from U.S. and Western officials. To explain how political power may be shifting in the region from this week's events, we're joined by Aaron David Miller. He was a longtime State Department official under both Democratic and Republican administrations who focused on Middle East peace for decades. He's now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. That's a D.C.-based think tank. Kim Ghattas is a senior fellow at Columbia University's Institute for Global Politics. A longtime journalist in the region, she is author of Black Wave, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the 40-year rivalry that unraveled culture, religion, and collective memory in the Middle East. And Andrew Exum is with us. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East in the Obama administration. He served as an Army Ranger officer in Afghanistan and Iraq and is now a writer and the author of This Man's Army, a soldier's story from the front lines of the war on terrorism. Thank you all for being with us. Aaron David Miller, we'll start with you. What's your reaction to the Israeli government telling some 1 million people in Gaza to move south ahead of an expected ground invasion?
I think it's largely performative. I mean, 24 hours is obviously a completely unrealistic time. For 24 days would be an unrealistic time frame. I think the Israelis feel obligated to do it. I think it creates the sense that they are expressing some concern for the civilian population of Gaza. The last several days, however, would suggest the opposite in terms of the blockade and the airstrike. So it may be performative. It may be what is needed to be done before the launch of a ground operation that is going to be unprecedented in scale, and I suspect disproportionate with respect to the use of force.
Andrew, how do you view it from a military perspective?
I do not see a way in which the IDF or even the best trained military on earth could do this without killing a lot of civilians. And of course, this terrain doesn't play to the IDF's advantages, the IDF has the Israeli Defense Forces have great special operations forces, great air forces, but this is going to require a ground assault, and the IDF is comprised primarily of conscripts and reservists. This is going to be exceptionally challenging for any military, and the terrain would favor the defender.
Kim, we should mention you are in Beirut, Lebanon. Give us a sense of how Hezbollah has responded to the week's events thus far, and how they would likely respond if Israel totally destroys the northern part of Gaza.
We've seen over the last week regular clashes on the border, but those are still fairly choreographed. And I know it sounds odd to say that clashes are choreographed, but there are rules of the game that both sides are still respecting for now, because it seems to me that Hezbollah does not for now want to be drawn into a wider conflict. But they do keep warning that if Israel goes further into bombarding Gaza and with a land incursion, they will be compelled to intervene. Keep in mind that in some ways they're already helping Hamas by keeping the Israeli army on edge on Israel's northern border.
Andrew, I see you shaking your head in agreement with Kim. What do you see as the prospects for a potential second front opening in this war?
First off, had Hezbollah attacked around the same time as Hamas, they could have created real dilemmas for the Israelis. I think it's clear that the Israelis were caught off guard and that the units along the borders were complacent. That's not going to be the case now. I think Israel is on as high alert as it's ever going to be, including all their units in the IDF. Israel has already dropped a lot of ordnance on Gaza. I suspect they've already worked through a lot of their initial target lists that they had and that they'd had prior to the war. So at this point, if they needed to, I think the Israeli air forces could turn their attentions to Lebanon, unfortunately. They've talked since the 2006 war about a Dahya doctrine, that they would level the southern suburbs, the Dahya of Beirut, if Hezbollah were to attack. So I think the risks for Hezbollah going forward is great. And unfortunately, I think they're going to come under more and more pressure from their constituents as well as from the Palestinians to do something as we see this Israeli ground assault into Gaza gather steam.
Aaron, let's talk more about the U.S. approach. President Biden has said unequivocally that the U.S. stands with Israel. He says the U.S. has Israel's back. He's also said that it's really important that Israel operate by the rules of war. Decipher that strategy, that approach for us.
Look, I think the president has created, for both personal reasons and also political reasons, a frame of reference which essentially is designed to allow the Israelis, give the Israelis the time, the space, and the support that they need to do, and whether or not they've explained to the administration what their objectives are is another matter, but to do what it is they feel compelled to do. $2 billion in ammunition, precision-guided munitions, interceptors for Iron Dome, and a supplemental to follow. At the same time, it's my view, having observed the way presidents sometimes function, that frame of binding the United States with Israel is also designed to preserve what I think is the leverage the administration will need at some point, whether it's days, weeks away, to have the kinds of conversations that only an American president can have with an Israeli prime minister. Not a honey conversation, but a vinegar conversation. And I suspect that that public-private sort of dynamic is going to be very much at play here as this operation unfolds.
Kim, on that point, how is the Biden administration's backing of Israel viewed within the region?
Not very positively, I must say. I think including Saudi officials, but also Jordanians and the Egyptians are very concerned about what they see as a blank check for Israel. And there's a lot of people pointing out that there are double standards here. When Russia attacks Ukraine, it is, of course, reprimanded and sanctioned, and it is made clear that targeting civilian infrastructure, stopping food, water from reaching civilian populations is unacceptable and is against international law. So when you hear Israeli officials and generals say we will cut off food, water, and fuel from Gaza, where 2 million people live, and nobody or very few officials in the US or in the West stand up against that and say, you know, there are, of course, reasons why you want to carry out a military operation, but cutting off water, food, etc., from civilian populations is not acceptable. Then people in this region say, well, these are the double standards. They want us to support the war in Ukraine, but they're not willing to, apply the same standards when it comes to Palestinians. I want to go back very briefly to the issue of Hezbollah and something that Andrew mentioned. We had a call across the region today by Hamas to come out in support of the Palestinian cause. And that call was not answered very enthusiastically in Lebanon, which I found surprising because Hezbollah is certainly able to bring out the masses into the streets. And I found the response tepid. And I think that's also because Hezbollah is very wary of being drawn into this conflict when it knows that its base, its own core supporters are tired of the last 3 years that have been very difficult for Lebanon for other reasons. We've been through a terrible economic crisis, and that generally they don't have a population supporting them in Lebanon for that. And also because Iran may be willing to sacrifice Hamas. They're far, they're not a proxy, they're an ally, but they're not, exactly an agent of Iran, but they have, strong relations. Hezbollah is different. It's their biggest asset. It's their foothold on the Mediterranean. And I don't think they want to risk it at the moment. They don't want to risk losing that at the moment.
Andrew, what's your assessment of Iran's role and its motivations in all of this?
Well, Iran has always been willing to fight Israel down to the last Lebanese or to the last Palestinian. But I wouldn't be surprised if Israel is losing patience, to say the least, with the way in which Iran has used its proxies to attack Israel over the past few years. Again, Hamas and Hezbollah, they're not, they don't answer, they're not under the direct command and control of Iran, but they are affiliates or are Iranian affiliates who receive Iranian funding, who receive Iranian training, Iranian weapons. At what point, the one actor that I could see wanting to escalate here could potentially be Israel. what point do they decide that they've got to send a message to Iran in a direct way?
Aaron, as we wrap up this conversation, how do this last weekend's attack and the resulting war, how does it shift the balance of power in the Middle East and the understanding about the region's future?
I think what is at stake here for the Israelis, we really haven't talked about the Israeli equity here. Not only do the Israelis have to deal with a galactic failure in operations and tactics and intelligence, what is at stake for them is the fact that the contract between the governed and those who govern, a government's capacity to protect its citizens, is at stake because they could not protect those Israelis from the terror rampage of those Hamas gunmen.
Kim, how do you see it?
What I'm watching is what countries like Saudi Arabia are going to do. Is there a role for them to try to turn this not into the aftermath of 9/11, where it's revenge and 20 decades of war, but the aftermath of the October War of 1973, the Yom Kippur War, where after a few years there is actually peace between Egypt and Israel. I think this is the critical juncture that we're at.
Andrew, taking Kim's point that this is a juncture, an inflection point, what do you see on the horizon?
Well, I think one of the things you've seen is there's been this normalization movement in the UAE and Bahrain, perhaps in Saudi Arabia, as well as with Israel. It's been largely driven by political and business elites. And one of the things that I think this conflict has created is it's created space for dissent, for public dissent about the normalization process. I think it's probably giving Hamas too much credit to say that this was one of their explicit goals of this operation. However, it's definitely an ancillary benefit from their perspective.
Kim, you were going to add something?
It's not possible to envisage that Israel carries out its military operation against Gaza and then turns around to the Saudis and says, now let's talk normalization. It is going to have to come in a wider conversation about Palestinian self-determination and, some form of ending the occupation and concessions to the Palestinians. This is not something that many Israelis want to hear today, but this is definitely the message we're getting, or I'm getting, from Arab officials that I'm speaking to. Normalization is not off the table, but as the Saudis have been saying, it cannot come without concessions to the Palestinians, and that's why we are at this juncture.
Aaron David Miller, Kim Ghattas, and Andrew Exum, our thanks to you three for your insights and perspectives.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.